It's past 8 and we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Good morning, Dr. John.
Yeah, good morning, Mick.
It's great to have you here again, Dr. John. We've had another big week with news. We've had a few questions that came in. In fact, two of the questions that came in last week we'll be talking about today. One was, why do people no longer live to hundreds of years if in the past they did? Can they again? And another one was, is there genetic evidence about us all being closely related? And of course, in the news this week, we've had so much more news about the Black Lives Matter and discrimination.
Yes, well, look, all of those questions are related to it, either directly or indirectly. And I want to thank the listeners who sent those questions in, because one of the things that we do on the program is we do address various topics like Black Lives Matter, and we're never going to be able to cover all of the areas that people have got a concern about, you know, and what we really want is to hear from the listeners about the bits and pieces that we probably haven't covered, so that then we can go back and do that. Yeah. And I do want to start this morning with going back over the Black Lives Matter protests and so on, because there doesn't really seem to be any end to them at the present time. And what's been really intriguing to me is I haven't yet seen any people in the mainstream media make the connection between evolutionary belief and racism. You know, Creation Ministries has been pointing this out for years, how Darwin's teaching and evolutionary beliefs really do contribute to racism. Yep. I mean, we don't blame Darwin for starting racism, because he didn't. But he did give it a pseudo-scientific basis. And everywhere, what we hear, if you ever raise the difference between creationist belief and evolutionary belief, you get told that, creation belief, that's religious, whereas evolutionary belief, well, that's scientific, see? And, of course, we're dominated in the world today by science being the absolute God, and anything scientific has got to be true. Yeah. Well, if you're going to take it that far, then what you see everywhere is that human evolutionary diagram. We've talked about it before, about the on the left side there's the ape, and on the right side the modern human, and the sequence in between. Yep. And of course the ape is very, very dark in colour, and the modern human is very, very light in colour. So the subliminal suggestion of that diagram is that the closer you are, or the darker your skin, the closer you are to the ape. That's what the diagram says. Yep. And everybody knows it. It's everywhere. Yep. And, of course, it's absolute nonsense. And this is what we've been pointing out from Creation Ministries year after year after year, but you don't seem to see it picked up in the mainstream media.
Yet science keeps sort of proving it too.
Well, that's right. And biblically, of course, that diagram is absolute nonsense. We are all the one human family, and we're going to talk about the genetic evidence for that today. We're all closely related because we've descended from the same single family that survived the flood. And it's interesting, you know, that as far as skin colour is concerned, we probably all started out with very much the same skin colour, and it certainly wasn't white. You know, it would have been brown, maybe mid-brown, but that family, for 5 generations after the flood, they all intermixed together. So they all would have had a very, very similar skin colour, and it would have been mid-brown. And I want to talk about a little bit how that would have got darker or lighter depending on the geographical area that people migrated to. So we'll get back to that when we come back.
Absolutely. And yeah, of course, I mentioned my freckles last week, which means I've still got some of those pigments there. And when I said science keeps proving it, I mean science keeps proving that Darwin's model is wrong, which is interesting. Yes, we'll be back with Dr. John very shortly. It is 14 minutes past 8. You're on 94.9. 8, and we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, and we're here to listen to the truth. And Dr. John's been talking to us a little bit about skin colour. We're talking a little bit about, well, what was in the news over the last few weeks, and that's been all about Black Lives Matter. And we'll be leading into that question. Is there genetic evidence about us all being closely related?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true that we are, Mick, and this is what we at pains to point out at Creation Ministries, because, like I said just before we had the last song, when the human race dispersed at Babel after God confused their languages, we'd been mixed together for about 5 generations after the flood. So we probably all had very much the same skin colour, and it would have been mid-brown. Mm-hmm. But when the dispersion happened and people migrated in different directions, after that then you get natural selection and adaptation to the regions that you're going to. Mm-hmm. And we pointed out last week that if you migrated towards equatorial regions, then you would naturally select for darker and darker skin colour. You would lose some of or you would concentrate the darker skinned genes, so mm-hmm. that people who then ended up in equatorial regions would have very, very dark skin. Mm-hmm. Whereas the people who migrated northwards to the colder regions, they would tend to lose some of the darker skin pigments because it would have been more beneficial for them to have lighter coloured skin. We all have some of that melanin pigment. And plenty of very light-skinned people tan quite readily when they get out in the sun. Some of us don't tan too readily, but
I tan brilliantly. I tan to a beautiful colour of red.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? But mm-hmm. But that really is the difference. We all have the same skin colour, really. We just have different amounts of that melanin pigment. And beneath the skin, we're all the same. And one of the things that I've found most disappointing with the Black Lives Matter protests, it's legitimate to point out some of the problems that we do have with discrimination and racism in this country. We definitely do. But unfortunately, it's been hijacked by political correctness. Yeah. And what they're doing in Australia and across the world is attacking statues of people who really were very important in history. What the politically correct ought to be attacking is something like that racist evolutionary diagram. Yeah. That's totally racist, and if you were really interested in political correctness, that's what you'd be looking at first, because that's something that we really ought to get rid of and tell people how false it is. Mm. In America, they've attacked statues of Christopher Columbus. Now, Columbus was a very, very brave, courageous man. Some of those explorers, they didn't know where they were sailing to. They took off in faith that they were going to be safe out on the ocean where they could see nothing. They didn't know what was ahead of them. Mm. And, of course, the people who are attacking those statues are the ones who are living in North America and enjoying the benefits of the country that he discovered. Mm. So, and here in Australia, attacking statues of Captain Cook. If any of the early British people had a pretty reasonable relationship with the Aboriginal people that they encountered, it was Captain Cook. Mm. The history of what happened when he got holes in the Endeavour up there on the Barrier Reef and had to beach it up in the Endeavour River, his relationship with the local people was pretty good. Mm. So why Captain Cook gets under attack, I really don't know, because Australia was never going to stay the same forever. I mean, even if this island nation had been isolated, the rest of the world was still going to develop air travel and space travel and things like that. So it wasn't going to stay occupied only by the local indigenous people forever.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be grateful that Captain Cook did get here, and we are all enjoying the benefits of this wonderful country now that we live in.
Yep.
So, I think the politically correct ought to be attacking the things that really are racist, like that evolutionary diagram.
Yeah, absolutely. You are on 94.9 this morning. It's 22 minutes past 8, and we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, and he's answering your questions. Please send them through to us on our SMS line. Text 0401 949 949. And we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. He's answering your questions that you sent through to our text line 0401 949 949. Now, I do have 2 voicemail messages on our system. Sadly, we can't listen to voicemails on our system. We can only read the SMSs. So please text us 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we've been talking this morning a bit about the Black Lives Matter, which has been in the media a lot over the last week, and also getting onto that question that came in last week. Is there any genetic evidence about us all being closely related? And, of course, you were talking about skin colour and how skin colour really is only skin deep, and we are genetically related. I actually Googled whether Darwin's diagram of evolution was flawed, just to see what Google had on it. And look, there was only 1,090,000 results about how Darwin's, that picture, his diagram of evolution is flawed. So there you go. There's a lot of backers there for you, Dr. John. And interestingly, the very first story from National Geographic, it goes into basically saying, yes, it's flawed, and now we've got, this CRISPR, and we can look at genes and all that sort of stuff. So I'm pretty sure that's what you're going to talk about.
Well, look, it's all very well for National Geographic to say it's flawed, but have they pointed out how racist it actually is? I bet they haven't done that.
No, I didn't say that.
No, they didn't say that. And the trouble is, that diagram is out there everywhere. You see it on T-shirts, you see it all over the place.
Yeah.
And every child in our schools is familiar with it.
Yep.
And they're all taught evolution. So look, the Bible says we did not evolve separately. We can all trace our ancestry back to the 8 survivors of Noah's Ark. And our listener said, is there any genetic evidence for it? And as I've said before, it only happened about 4,000 years ago anyway. And yes, of course, there is genetic evidence for it. And to show that, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about DNA. And it's not easy to talk about DNA without visual aids because, when you can put it up on a PowerPoint slide, it's much easier to see.
Yes.
But DNA is the blueprint that built each one of us.
Yeah, I'll give people the visual aid. Okay, imagine a big twirly-whirly thing. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. It's a chemical compound in the form of a long, twisted string containing 4 nucleotide bases. And that's what actually we get the name DNA from those nucleotide bases. And there are about 3 billion of them in the string. There's quite a few. And for the 4 of them, we give them their first letter, A, T, G, and C, so that we can see that the order that they have along the string is the code. It's a bit like a computer program. I mean, we're all familiar with what a computer program printout looks like, using all the symbols of the QWERTY keyboard. And of course, it looks like a whole lot of symbols, but as we know, each of those symbols really is only a combination of 2, an on or an off switch. So we really only use 2 symbols in our computer programs, even though it looks like a whole lot. But in DNA, there are 4. And some years ago, there was a project called the Human Genome Project to work out the entire human genome, that is, all the letters, the 3 billion of them, along that string. And it started in 1990. It took 13 years to complete, and it was finished in 2003. And one of the team leaders of the project was a guy called Craig Venter, and he was the first person on Earth to actually get his entire genome printed out. And I've got a great slide of him standing in front of his printout. And it is an absolute library. There were 175 volumes, and I want people to think about this, 175 volumes. Each volume had 750 A4 pages, 750 printed both sides in Times New Roman 8 point.
Tiny.
So fairly small, right? And that was the printout of the A, T, G and C in the order and sequence that they were in to build Craig Venter. I mean, It is absolutely astonishing. And it's a pretty true rendition of what we are like. 175 volumes with all of those pages in them, but in actual fact, in real life, we only have 46 volumes, and each of those volumes is called a chromosome. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about that.
You're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International, and he's partway into answering that question. Is there any genetic evidence that we're all, pretty much the same? And we're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. He's been talking to us this morning a little bit about skin colour and how, we really all have the same skin colour. It's just my freckles mean that I've got less of that skin colour than somebody who has that same colour all over. And we've also been answering a question that came in last week. Is there any genetic evidence about us all being closely related? Now, of course, I explained how genes are twirly-whirly things. Dr. John explained it in slightly more detail than that, and how massive the genetic code inside us is. And I'm sure you're going to start to talk about these similarities in genes.
Well, what we're trying to do, Mick, is get round to answering the question, because our listener wants to know about genetic evidence that we're very closely related.
Yep.
And I've had to lay a bit of groundwork for that. And so we talked about the printout of the entire genome for Dr. Craig Venter, who headed up the Human Genome Project. And then I've said that although the photo of him in front of his printout showed it had 175 volumes, in actual fact we've got 46 volumes. And we call them chromosomes. And we get 23 volumes from our mother and 23 from our father. And they all match up and line up together. They've all got, we number them all when you look at them with an electron microscope. But it's interesting that one of the 23 pairs, in some people they look the same, and in others they look different. And when they look the same, we call those chromosomes X chromosomes. And if you happen to have two of them, you're a woman. And when they look a bit different, one of them we call the Y chromosome. And if you happen to have an X and a Y, then you're a bloke. And that is the big difference. That's what makes men, that little Y chromosome. And it's very, very interesting that when the Y chromosomes of all the different ethnic groups of men all across the globe, there's always some differences depending on the geographical location they've actually come from. But it's now known that every man's Y chromosome can be traced back and back and back through time to one man. And the secular world calls him Y chromosome Adam. So it all goes back to one man who was the actual progenitor of all of us. And that really is part of the genetic evidence that we can say we are all very, very closely related, because we all have the same male ancestor back in our dim, distant past. And the other thing that is very, very interesting, getting away from the those 46 chromosomes, is that we do have some DNA in another little structure in the cell outside of the nucleus called a mitochondrion, and we have quite a few of those in each of our cells. And it's interesting that we only get them from our mother, because the DNA that fathers...
Sorry, can I just ask? I saw the picture here of that guy standing in front of all of those books. So this thing you're talking about now would be a whole new series of books.
It wouldn't be quite as big as that.
But it's not part of that.
No, it's not part of that.
Okay.
It's additional to that.
Okay,
right?
There we go.
Yeah. So this is the DNA in the mitochondria. And because our nuclear DNA, one of those 46 volumes, that comes half from mother, half from father. But the rest of the cell, where the mitochondria are, we only get that when our mother's egg cell divides. So we all get our mitochondrial DNA from our mother, whether we're men or women.
Wow.
Men don't pass it on, only women pass it on. And of course, it's been known for many, many years that we can all trace our mitochondrial DNA back to one single female ancestor.
Oh, let me guess.
Yeah.
Eve.
The secular world calls her mitochondrial Eve. So even science talks about Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve. Now, they don't believe they're the biblical Adam and Eve, but we all do trace back to one man and one woman. So in answer to our listener's question, that is absolute cast iron genetic evidence that we are all closely related. I mean, if we trace back to the same original two, one man, one woman, we have to be closely related, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
There's no argument. Now, the interesting thing is that evolution could never have predicted that.
No.
That's exactly what the Bible says, but evolution would never in a million years, if they existed, would ever have predicted that.
I just love that they call them Adam and Eve, mitochondrial Adam and Eve. What about that? And I still remember that story you told us over a year ago about the DNA Nation show, where they had Ernie Dingo, they had our swimmer,
Ian
Thorpe, and a comedian lady from Melbourne. And they traced all their DNA back to a very similar place in the Middle East around the similar time, which I thought was amazing as well.
That's where we all came from.
Yeah. You are on 94.9 this morning. It is 8:45. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Have any questions? Send them through to our text line. So SMS, the number 0401 949 94. Creation Ministries International. He's been talking to us this morning a little bit about Black Lives Matter and about how we've all got the same skin colour, really, and also about DNA. And it's been really interesting. It's been proven pretty much that we all come from the same people. And even the non-Christians call them mitochondrial Adam and mitochondrial Eve. Absolutely amazing, Dr. John.
Y chromosome Adam, not mitochondrial Adam.
Oh, okay, Y chromosome. There you go. Well, look, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but look, an Adam and Eve back there that, of course, is the same Adam and Eve we talk about. They just don't realise it.
Well, that's what we certainly believe, Mick.
Yes. Now, are we going on to the next question?
Well, look, I wanted to make another comment. I've been talking about the X and the Y chromosomes, and the interesting observation you can make about the X and Y chromosomes is that whether you're male or female is determined at the moment of your conception, and it can never be changed. That is your biological sex. And, of course, our modern world is allowing people to choose their own gender. And, if you believe that you're male or female, you can have hormone treatment or surgical treatment. And that might change your outlook, but it can never actually change your biological sex. That is set in concrete the moment you are conceived, and it will never change. And I thought it was interesting, we if human remains ever got washed up on a beach, and we had that last week in Yamina, they found a part of a skull on Yamina Beach. If you could extract DNA from those human remains, then you would find that it had either two X's or an X and a Y, so you would know whether the remains were male or female. They're not going to be anything in between. They're going to be male or female.
And they can't tell you that they want it the other way around either.
Yeah. So, yes, you might be able to change your emotional outlook by surgical procedures and hormone treatment, but you can never change your biological sex that is determined at the moment of conception.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. John, we had another question last week. It is, why were people able to live to hundreds of years? If in the past they did, can they again? My guess is you're going to tell us a bit more about DNA, right?
Well, yes and no. They were created, the original people, with perfect DNA without any mutational changes in it, which only developed over time. And because they were created perfect, they were able to live for massive lifespans, hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, the first 10 people that we have recorded in the Bible lived for over 900 years because they were born into a perfect world, perfectly created, and it was only the entry of sin that began to corrupt that world and cause the genetic deterioration that we still observe today. And that deterioration took time. And we see that after the flood, there's a fairly dramatic but steady downturn in those lifespans, probably partly due to climate change as well, the climate change after the flood, as well as the deterioration over time, the genetic deterioration in our DNA, increasing mutations. So those lifespans progressively came down to what we see now. Now, I suppose over the last 100 years we've seen a little bit of an increase in lifespans, probably because of the advent of antibiotics and modern medicine, and people do seem to be living a bit longer. I mean, you do hear of people getting over the 100 these days, whereas it didn't happen too much in the past. I mean, there was Vera Lynn died last week at 103. So, but that is exceptional.
But the DNA isn't getting better.
No, the DNA isn't getting better. Some people haven't had as many mutations to deteriorate it as others. So some people are living a little bit longer, but they're not improving their DNA. It can't improve. It can only get worse. But in some people, it gets worse faster than it does in others for all sorts of reasons. But look, the mortality that we all face is due to the corrupting effect of sin fundamentally. That's why we age. That's why our bodies break down. And there's no way that we are ever going to get back to those extreme lifespans in our natural bodies. But of course, spiritually, we will.
Yes.
And we are not just a physical body, we are also a spirit. And part of the very, very good news that we have from Jesus' life, death and resurrection is that physical immortality is going to be restored along with the spiritual immortality that we already have. Now, it's going to be a different existence, but it will be a physical existence in a different world from what we know now. But that's the promise that we have as Christians, that we are going to have a newly created body and we will live in a newly created earth. Now, the same promise is not made to those who have not put their faith and trust in Jesus. That certainly their spirits are going to continue on for eternity, and I don't think that eternity is going to be pleasant, but they don't have the promise of a physical body being recreated, which we do as Christian people. So it really is a great thing to look forward to. Now, unfortunately, many people choose not to believe that, and one of the reasons they choose not to believe that is that they choose to believe in evolution. And the consequences of that choice are really disastrous. At Creation Ministries, we know that one of the main blockages, one of the main reasons why people find it very hard to believe the good news about Jesus is because they have believed a lie about their origins. They believe their origin was evolutionary rather than creation, and consequently they won't believe in the future that they could have if they put their faith and trust in Jesus. And that's what we're really on about at Creation Ministries. We want to get across to people that the scientific evidence, and we've been talking about that this morning, the scientific evidence shows that what the Bible says is true. And really, the benefits of believing that are just enormous.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again this morning, Dr. John. Amazing. I'm feeling a little down, you know. One, my ancestors had better skin than me. Mine's broken down into this freckly skin, and I'm not going to live as long. But I guess the good news came at the end, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, absolutely, it did, Mick.
How good is that? Yes, we will live forever in a new body, in a new heaven. And I believe from what I've read, that heaven is, well, the new earth, rather. It's a pretty cool place. Jesus has been there preparing it for us for quite a while. So it will be absolutely awesome. Hey, you are on 94.9. Don't forget, send through your questions for next week. We did get a couple come through. We'll talk about them next week. And that number to send them through to is 0401 949.